Here is a calculation that will permanently change how you read your bank statement. In 1971, you put $100,000 into a standard American savings account. You earned the average savings rate every single year for 54 years without touching it. Today, your balance reads $340,000. You feel wealthy. You feel disciplined. You feel like the system rewarded you. Now here is the number that destroys that feeling completely. The CPI-adjusted purchasing power of $100,000 in 1971 requires $780,000 in 2025 to buy the same goods, the same groceries, the same rent, the same fuel. You saved for 54 years and lost $440,000 in real purchasing power, while your nominal balance grew. You did not lose it to fraud. You did not lose it to bad investments. You did not lose it to a market crash. You lost it to a mechanism that has no name on your bank statement, a mechanism that runs every hour of every day, a mechanism the Federal Reserve does not just permit but actively targets as official policy. Here is the proof that this is deliberate and not accidental. The FDIC reports the average American savings account pays 0.46% interest today. The Federal Reserve's official inflation target is 2% annually. The institution that sets American monetary policy has a published goal that guarantees savings accounts lose purchasing power every single year. Not in bad years, not temporarily, every year, by design, in writing. Today I'm going to show you exactly how this mechanism was built, how it has operated through 6 documented waves since 1971, which assets survive it and which destroy wealth silently, and what 3 specific actions you can take today using free tools to stop losing ground inside a system designed to move your money upward while you sleep. Before the history makes sense, you need to understand one fact that most financial education deliberately skips. Inflation is not a weather event. It is not a natural disaster. It is the mathematical consequence of one specific action: creating more money than the economy produces in goods and services. Every time a bank approves a loan, it does not transfer existing money. It creates new money by typing a number into a digital ledger. That number becomes your loan balance. That new purchasing power enters the economy and competes with all existing purchasing power for the same goods and services. More money competing for the same goods means each individual dollar buys less. That is inflation, not a force of nature, a consequence of money creation. This is not a fringe argument. The Bank of England published a paper in March 2014 titled Money Creation in the Modern Economy. It states directly that commercial banks create new money every time they extend credit. That loans create deposits, not the other way around. That the money supply expands and contracts based on the lending decisions of private institutions. Now look at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis Fed database, which is publicly accessible to anyone. In January 1971, the M2 money supply, the broadest standard measure of money in circulation, stood at $628 billion. In January 2025, M2 stands at $21.5 trillion. That is a 3,323% increase in 54 years. Over the same period, US real GDP, the actual productive output of the entire American economy, adjusted for inflation, grew 380%. Money supply grew 3,323%. Productive output grew 380%. The gap between those two numbers is precisely where your purchasing power went. Not to bad luck, to arithmetic. To understand why inflation became permanent after 1971, you need to understand the specific constraint that was removed on August 15th of that year. Under the Bretton Woods system, established in 1944, the US dollar was convertible to gold at $35 per ounce. Every other major currency was pegged to the dollar. This created a hard ceiling on money creation. You could not print more dollars than your gold reserves could back, because any nation holding excess dollars could present them and demand physical gold in return. France under Charles de Gaulle did exactly this between 1965 and 1970. He shipped dollars back to the United States and withdrew physical gold from Fort Knox in quantities that alarmed the Nixon administration. By 1971, the United States held $10.2 billion of gold at official prices, but had $24 billion of foreign claims outstanding. The convertibility promise was mathematically broken. The numbers were public. The only question was who would acknowledge it first. Nixon acknowledged it on August 15, 1971. He suspended dollar-to-gold convertibility on national television and called it temporary. It has never been reversed. The suspension is now 54 years old. From that single evening, the Federal Reserve gained the ability to expand the money supply to whatever level its governors judged necessary. No gold ceiling, no convertibility constraint, no external check on the volume of money creation. The data shows what happened immediately. Between 1913 and 1971, 58 years with a gold constraint, cumulative CPI inflation totaled 196%. A dollar lost 66% of its purchasing power across 6 decades. Between 1971 and 2025, 54 years without the constraint, cumulative CPI inflation totaled 680%. A dollar lost 87% of its purchasing power, more than twice the erosion in a shorter period. And that uses the official CPI, which, as you will see in the next section, systematically understates the inflation that hits ordinary households hardest. Since 1971, inflation has arrived in 6 distinct waves. Every single one follows the same cause and effect sequence. Understanding that sequence is the most valuable pattern recognition available to anyone managing their own finances. Wave 1, 1972 to 1975. Nixon's removal of the gold standard was immediately followed by expansionary monetary policy ahead of the 1972 election. Federal Reserve Chairman Arthur Burns, operating under documented political pressure from the Nixon White House, expanded money supply aggressively. CPI inflation rose from 3.2% in 1972 to 11% in 1974. The 1973 OPEC oil embargo added a supply shock on top of the monetary fuel. The combination produced the first stagflation in American history, rising prices and rising unemployment simultaneously. The economic models of the time said this was impossible. It was only impossible if you ignored the monetary cause. Wave 2, 1977 to 1980. Stimulus spending to resolve the 1974 recession expanded money supply again. By 1979, CPI inflation reached 11.3%. By 1980, it peaked at 13.5%. The purchasing power of $1 fell 26% in 3 years. Mortgage rates reached 18.5% in October 1981, making home ownership mathematically inaccessible to median income earners for the first time in the post-war period. Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker broke this wave by raising the federal funds rate to 20%. Inflation fell. Unemployment rose to 10.8%. 1.5 million construction jobs disappeared in 2 years. The mechanism was suppressed. The architecture that created it was untouched. Wave 3, 1987 to 1991. Post-Volcker monetary loosening through the mid-1980s pushed inflation back to 6.1% by 1990. The savings and loan crisis of 1986 to 1995 collapsed 1,043 financial institutions at a cost of $132 billion to taxpayers. The Resolution Trust Corporation absorbed the losses with public funds, while executives kept compensation earned during the period of reckless lending. The pattern of privatized profit and socialized loss that defined 2008 was first institutionalized here. Wave 4, 1999 to 2002. A decade of rate cuts following the 1991 recession inflated technology stock valuations to levels disconnected from any underlying earnings. The Nasdaq peaked at 5,048 in March 2000 and fell 78% to 1,114 by October 2002. $5 trillion of nominal wealth evaporated. Ordinary Americans who had moved retirement savings into technology funds absorbed the losses. The investment banks that underwrote the IPOs had collected their fees before the collapse. Wave 5, 2003 to 2008. The Federal Reserve cut rates to 1% following the dot-com crash and held them there through 2004. That monetary environment directly inflated the housing bubble. American banks issued approximately $3 trillion in subprime mortgages and repackaged them into securities rated AAA by agencies paid by the same institutions whose products they were rating. When rates rose from 1% to 5.25% between 2004 and 2006, Adjustable rate mortgage payments reset upward. 3.8 million American families received foreclosure notices between 2008 and 2012. The Federal Reserve extended $16.1 trillion in emergency loans to financial institutions, according to a 2011 Government Accountability Office audit. 0 senior banking executives were criminally prosecuted. Wave 6, 2020 to 2023. The COVID response added $4.8 trillion to M2 money supply in 18 months. The Federal Reserve balance sheet grew from $4.2 trillion to $8.9 trillion. By June 2022, CPI inflation reached 9.1%, the highest in 41 years. The Federal Reserve raised rates from 0.25% to 5.5% in 14 months. The interest cost on US national debt reached $1.1 trillion in fiscal year 2024, more than the entire defense budget. The money created to resolve the 2020 crisis generated an inflation wave that now costs more to service than the United States spends on its military every year. 6 waves, same sequence every time. Monetary expansion, delayed inflation, rate increase, recession, new expansion to cure the recession. Next wave. Here is the layer of this story that makes it personal rather than historical. The Consumer Price Index does not measure the inflation that matters most to ordinary households. It measures a basket of goods weighted by average consumption patterns. And the weighting choices made in constructing that basket have consequences that systematically understate the inflation hitting the 3 expenses no household can escape. Since 1971, headline CPI has risen 680%. Over the same period, the CPI for medical care has risen 2,200%. The CPI for college tuition and fees has risen 3,100%. The Case-Shiller National Home Price Index has risen 2,800% in nominal terms. Housing, healthcare, education. The 3 costs you cannot substitute away from. All inflated at 3 to 4 times the official inflation rate used to measure whether your wages are keeping pace. Every Social Security cost of living adjustment is calculated using CPI. Every inflation-linked bond is priced using CPI. Every wage negotiation in which an employer cites inflation data uses CPI. The number that understates the problem is the number built into every institutional mechanism designed to protect you from inflation. The Economic Policy Institute has calculated that if you adjust wages for housing, healthcare, and education inflation, rather than headline CPI, real wages for the median American worker declined 4% since 2000, despite nominal wage growth of 62% over the same period. Workers received a 62% nominal raise. They lost 4% of their real purchasing power. The raise was real. The progress was an illusion created by measuring with the wrong ruler. The Bureau of Labor Statistics also applies a methodology called hedonic adjustment to certain CPI components. When a product improves in quality, the BLS may reduce its effective price in the index to reflect the quality improvement, even if the actual price paid by the consumer rose. A laptop that costs the same as last year's model, but has a faster processor, is recorded as a price decrease in the CPI. The consumer pays the same amount. The index records a reduction. In categories where this adjustment is applied most aggressively, the CPI systematically understates what consumers actually spend. This is not a conspiracy. The methodology is published and publicly accessible. But its effect is to make the official inflation number more favourable than the lived experience of the households it is supposed to represent. Inflation does not destroy wealth, it transfers it. For every dollar of purchasing power that leaves a savings account, that purchasing power moves somewhere. Understanding where it moves is the most important financial education most people never receive. The answer comes from an 18th century economist named Richard Cantillon. In the 1730s, Cantillon observed that newly created money does not distribute evenly across an economy. It enters at a specific point. It benefits those closest to that point most. It reaches those furthest from it last and in diluted form. By the time new money filters through to wages and consumer prices, the people who first received it have already spent it at the previous lower price level. In the modern Federal Reserve System, the point of entry is financial institutions. When the Federal Reserve creates money, it purchases assets from banks and primary dealers. Those institutions receive the new money first. They deploy it into financial markets. Asset prices rise. The people who own those assets see their net worth increase before the new money reaches the broader economy and pushes consumer prices up. By the time CPI inflation is visible in grocery stores, the asset price inflation has already run. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis distributional financial accounts document this precisely. In 1990, the top 1% of Americans owned 23% of total household wealth. In 2024, they owned 31%. The bottom 50% owned 4% of household wealth in 1990. They own 2.6% today. Their share declined as the money supply tripled. This is the Cantillon effect, operating at the scale of the entire American economy over 34 years. Between 2009 and 2020, the net worth of the top 1% of Americans increased by $18 trillion. The net worth of the bottom 50% increased by $0.3 trillion. The ratio of those two numbers is 60 to 1. One group received the monetary expansion through asset price appreciation. The other group received it through wage gains that lagged inflation. Same monetary policy. Opposite financial outcomes, determined entirely by which side of the asset ownership line you stood on when the money was created. Here are the 2024 and 2025 numbers that make every section of this video land in your specific financial situation. Your savings account. FDIC average savings rate, 0.46%. Federal Reserve inflation target, 2%. Guaranteed annual purchasing power loss, 1.54%. On a $50,000 balance, that is $770 of real wealth transferred out of your account every year. Your balance does not decrease, your purchasing power does. The loss is invisible in nominal terms and permanent in real terms. Housing. 1971, median US home price to median household income ratio, 2.9. 2024 ratio nationally, 6.6. San Francisco, 12.4. Los Angeles, 11.8. New York, 10.9. A household earning the San Francisco median income of $136,000 qualifies for a mortgage of approximately $544,000 at standard 28% front-end debt-to-income ratios. The San Francisco median home costs $1.3 million. The qualifying income required at standard ratios is $220,000 annually. The math does not work for the median earner in the city, with the highest concentration of high-income jobs in the United States. That is not a housing supply problem alone. That is 54 years of monetary expansion, inflating a finite asset faster than the wages of the people who need to buy it. Healthcare. Average annual employer-sponsored family health insurance premium in 2024, $25,572, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation. In 2000, it was $6,438, a 297% increase in 24 years against a CPI increase of 89% over the same period. Healthcare inflation ran at 3.3 times the general inflation rate, for a cost that 330 million Americans cannot choose to avoid. Education. Average annual cost of a four-year public university in 2024, including tuition, fees, and room and board, $28,840 according to the College Board. In 2000, it was $10,820 in inflation-adjusted terms, a 167% real increase in 24 years. Total student loan debt, $1.77 trillion. Average monthly payment in repayment, $503. The cost of the credential required to access middle-class income has itself become a 54-year compounding inflation trade that transfers income from graduates to financial institutions for decades after graduation. The trade school calculation. An electrician completing a four-year apprenticeship in California in 2024 earns between $65,000 and $85,000 annually at journeyman level, with zero student debt. The Bureau of Labor Statistics projects 11% employment growth for electricians between 2023 and 2033. The National Electrical Contractors Association reports a current shortage of 79,000 licensed electricians nationally. A marketing graduate from a 4-year university in California in 2024 earns a median starting salary of $52,000, according to the National Association of Colleges and Employers, carrying an average student loan balance of $37,574 at 6.5% federal interest rate. Monthly loan payment, $425. Real starting income after loan service, $47,900 annually. The electrician at journeyman level, 3 years into their career, earns 40% more with zero debt and operates in a market with a documented structural labour shortage. The teenagers in San Francisco choosing trade school are not making a romantic decision. They are running a net present value calculation that the inflation system made rational by inflating the cost of the traditional path faster than it inflated the return. 3 actions: specific, measurable, executable today. First, measure your financial progress in purchasing power, not dollars. Your salary increasing from $60,000 to $72,000 over 5 years is a 20% nominal gain. CPI inflation over those 5 years totaled approximately 22%. Your real purchasing power declined 2% despite your raise. If housing costs in your city rose 35% over the same period, your real purchasing power, relative to your largest single expense, declined 15%. The number on your paycheck is not your financial progress. Your purchasing power relative to the 3 things you cannot choose not to buy is your financial progress. Open ChatGPT right now and type this exact prompt. My salary in 2020 was blank dollars. My salary today is blank dollars. CPI inflation since 2020 is approximately 22%. Housing costs in my city rose approximately blank percent. Healthcare costs for my family rose approximately blank percent. Calculate my real purchasing power change and tell me what salary I would need today to have genuinely gained ground since 2020. The output of that calculation will reframe every compensation conversation you have for the rest of your working life. Second, stop holding cash as a wealth preservation strategy. Since 1971, a standard savings account has returned approximately 4.1% annually in nominal terms and approximately 0.3% annually in real inflation-adjusted terms. It barely kept pace with official CPI and lost ground substantially against housing, healthcare, and education inflation. Over the same period, the S&P 500 Total Return Index returned approximately 10.7% annually in nominal terms and 6.8% in real terms. US residential real estate returned approximately 4.2% nominally and 0.7% in real terms nationally, with enormous geographic variation. Gold returned approximately 7.9% nominally and 3.9% in real terms since 1971. The historical record across 54 years of the current monetary system is unambiguous. Productive assets, equity stakes in businesses, have been the most reliable store of real value. Cash and savings accounts have been the most reliable destroyers of real value while appearing safe. This is not investment advice. It is the documented performance record of different asset classes in the specific monetary environment you are living inside. Third, build a personal inflation dashboard using free AI tools in the next 30 minutes. The damage inflation does is invisible in nominal terms. Making it visible requires calculation most people never do because it is tedious manually. It takes 4 minutes with AI. Go to Claude or ChatGPT, enter your income from 5 years ago and today. Enter your major expense categories and what they cost 5 years ago versus now. Enter your current savings and investment balances. Ask the tool to calculate your real purchasing power change, your inflation-adjusted savings rate, and the real return you have earned on your savings after inflation. Then ask it to show you which specific changes to your allocation or debt payoff sequence would most improve your real financial position over the next 5 years. That single conversation produces more personalized and actionable output than most initial sessions with a $200 per hour financial advisor. Because the AI uses your actual numbers and does not have a product commission attached to its recommendation, the Federal Reserve's 2% inflation target is not a ceiling they are trying to stay below. It is a floor they are trying to stay above. They have stated in published policy documents that mild continuous inflation is preferable to deflation for the functioning of a debt-based monetary system. The purchasing power erosion in your savings account is not a temporary condition or an accident. It is official policy, documented, permanent, and after this video, visible. Visible is where it stops being invisible, and visible is where your decisions start being different.